The night is a suffocating black, pierced only by the jagged flashes of artillery in the distance. A cold wind carries the acrid sting of smoke curling through the shattered skeleton of what was once a school in Bakhmut. Somewhere in the darkness, a low moan rises, a soldier barely audible calling for help. The ground trembles as another shell lands nearby, shaking loose dust from the crumbling ceiling. In the dim glow of a flickering headlamp, a young medic kneels beside a wounded man, her hands trembling as she presses a bandage against his chest. Her breath catches a mix of fear and focus as she whispers, "Stay with me, Petro. Just stay with me." Her name is Olena, a 26-year-old military medic from a small village near Lviv. Her green eyes, wide with adrenaline, dart between the soldier's pale face and the chaos beyond the doorway. The air is thick with the metallic tang of blood and the sharp crack of gunfire. She doesn't hear it anymore. Not really. It's just noise now, a relentless hum that blends with the pounding of her heart. Her fingers slip on the bandage slick with sweat and blood, but she doesn't stop. She can't. Another explosion rocks the ground closer this time, and she flinches, shielding Petro with her body. For a moment, time slows. Her mind flashes to a memory, a summer evening, her mother's laughter, the smell of freshly baked bread. Then the world snaps back. Petro's breathing is shallow, his eyes fluttering. She leans closer, her voice steady, despite the tremor in her hands. "You're going to see your daughter again, I promise." Outside the battle rages, Ukrainian soldiers hold a fragile line against advancing forces, their silhouettes darting through the ruins under a sky torn by tracer rounds. Olena's radio crackles a voice, cutting through the static medic. "We need you at the east wall now." She hesitates, glancing at Petro. His hand grips hers, weakly a silent plea. She knows she can't save everyone tonight, but she can save him. She has to. The decision weighs like lead in her chest. Another shell screams overhead, and the walls shudder. Olena's headlamp flickers, casting jagged shadows across Petro's face. She takes a breath, steeling herself, and reaches for her medical kit. This is her fight, not with a rifle, but with gauze tourniquets, and a stubborn refusal to let death win. How did she end up here, in this crumbling school-turned hospital, with the weight of lives in her shaking hands? 2 years ago, Olena was studying to be a pediatric nurse, dreaming of a quiet life. Now she's a lifeline in a war that has swallowed her country. The story begins months earlier, in the quiet before the storm, when Olena made a choice that would lead her to this moment, a choice born of duty fear and an unshakable love for her people. The night presses in heavy and relentless. Olena's headlamp catches the glint of a shattered window, reflecting her own face for a fleeting second, determined, exhausted alive. She whispers to Petro again, her voice a fragile thread of hope in the dark. "Hold on. Just hold on." Context: military geography politics. The city of Bakhmut, a once thriving hub in Ukraine's Donetsk region, lies in ruins by late 2022. Its streets, lined with Soviet-era apartment blocks and small shops, are now scarred by shelling their facades, reduced to jagged concrete and twisted rebar. The city sits in a shallow valley, surrounded by low hills and patches of dense forest, making it a focal point for relentless fighting. Control of Bakhmut means control of key roads, leading deeper into the Donbass, a region where the war's pulse beats hardest. Both sides, Ukrainian forces and their opponents, have poured resources into this grinding battle, turning the city into a crucible of endurance. The front lines shift daily, sometimes hourly, as trenches snake through the outskirts and snipers perch in shattered high-rises. Neither side yields easily, and the cost is measured in lives and rubble. The winter of 2022 is brutal. Temperatures plunge below freezing, and a grey, heavy sky blankets the city in near constant gloom. Snow falls intermittently, mixing with ash to form a gritty sludge that clings to boots and tires. The wind howls through empty streets, carrying the distant thud of artillery and the occasional scream of a rocket. Soldiers huddle in makeshift shelters, basements, abandoned schools or dugouts, carved into frozen earth where the cold seeps into bones as deeply as the fear. Supplies are scarce, food is rationed, and medical kits are often incomplete. Radios crackle with urgent orders, but static and jammed signals make communication a gamble. The city's infrastructure is a ghost. Electricity is a memory, and water is hauled in plastic jugs when it can be found at all. Beyond Bakhmut, the war stretches across Ukraine's eastern and southern fronts. In late 2022, global attention flickers between the conflict and its ripple effects energy crises in Europe, grain shortages, and diplomatic talks that seem distant from the mud and blood of the battlefield. Volunteers from across Ukraine, and even beyond, funnel into the fight, bringing with them a mix of determination and desperation. Ukrainian units a patchwork of regular army territorial defense and foreign volunteers hold their ground with aging Soviet-era equipment alongside newer Western-supplied gear. Their opponents, equally determined, press forward with waves of infantry and heavy armor, their movements shrouded in the fog of war. Both sides navigate a landscape of mistrust, where every civilian could be a scout, every shadow a threat. Olena's unit, part of a Ukrainian mechanized brigade, is tasked with holding a series of defensive positions along Bakhmut's eastern edge. Their mission is simple, but harrowing: prevent the line from breaking, no matter the cost. The brigade is understrength, its ranks thinned by months of attrition. Medics like Olena are stretched to their limits, rotating between frontline aid posts and makeshift field hospitals. The school where Olena now works, its chalkboards, still scrawled with children's drawings, has become a triage center. Its walls, pockmarked by shrapnel, offer little protection from the cold or the shells that fall without warning. The medics operate by flashlight and instinct, their hands chapped and raw from the freezing air. The weather is as much an adversary as the fighting itself. Frostbite gnaws at fingers and toes, and hypothermia is a constant threat for the wounded waiting to be evacuated. The ground frozen solid one day, and a muddy quagmire the next slows movement and complicates logistics. Ambulances, when they can reach the front, often get stuck in the mire or targeted by drones. Olena's team relies on foot or battered off-road vehicles to ferry the wounded, a journey that feels like a gauntlet through hell. The sky above is a battlefield of its own, with drones buzzing like angry hornets, their cameras and payloads an ever-present danger. In the broader world, 2022 is a year of upheaval. Nations debate sanctions and military aid, their decisions trickling down to the soldiers in Bakhmut as sporadic deliveries of equipment or delays in supplies. Civilians caught in the crossfire flee when they can, leaving behind homes and lives. Those who remain, often the elderly or those too stubborn to leave, huddle in basements, their faces etched with resignation. Olena sees them sometimes, their eyes meeting hers as she passes a silent acknowledgement of shared survival. The war has no clear heroes or villains in these moments, only people trying to endure. For Olena, Bakhmut is both a prison and a purpose. She volunteered in the spring of 2022, driven by a quiet resolve to protect her country. Her medical training, incomplete but rigorous, prepared her for broken bones and fevers, not for shrapnel wounds or the screams of men calling for their mothers. Yet she adapts, learning to stitch wounds by headlamp, to calm a dying soldier with a steady voice, to ignore the fear that claws at her chest. The city's geography, its narrow streets, its hills, its rivers, shapes her every move. She knows the shortcuts through alleys, the buildings that offer cover, the spots where snipers lurk. She knows, too, the weight of the war's unspoken rules. Trust your instincts, move fast, and never assume the next moment is guaranteed. As the battle for Bakhmut intensifies, Olena's unit braces for another push. Intelligence reports warn of a renewed assault with armored vehicles and infantry massing beyond the hills. The Ukrainians dig in their trenches, shallow but stubborn, their resolve hardened by months of holding this broken city. Olena, stationed at the school, prepares for the inevitable wave of wounded. Her medical kit is a patchwork of supplies, some donated, some scavenged, all precious. She checks her tourniquets, her morphine, her bandages, her hands, moving with the muscle memory of someone who has done this too many times. Outside, the snow falls heavier now, blanketing the ruins in a deceptive calm. The war feels far away for a fleeting moment, but Olena knows better. It's coming, and she must be ready. Backstory and inner world. Olena Mikhailivna Hrytsenko was born in a village nestled in the rolling hills outside Lviv, where the air smells of pine and the summers hum with cicadas. At 26, she carries the quiet strength of someone who grew up tending to her family's small garden, helping her mother bake bread, and listening to her grandfather's stories of a different war long ago. Her hands now calloused from months of wielding medical shears and tourniquets, were once soft-trained to comfort children in a pediatric ward. She was in her final year of nursing school when the war escalated in early 2022. Her dreams of a quiet life in a Lviv hospital shattered by the distant rumble of artillery. Olena volunteered as a military medic, not out of a thirst for heroism, but because she couldn't bear the thought of standing by while her country bled. "If I can save one person," she told her mother, tears in her eyes, "it's worth it." Her mother, a widow who lost her husband to illness years before, hugged her tightly and said nothing. The silence spoke louder than words. Olena's unit includes a handful of others who, like her, are bound by duty and circumstance. There's Petro, the wounded soldier from the opening scene, a 32-year-old father from Kharkiv, with a crooked smile, and a daughter who draws him pictures he keeps folded in his pocket. Petro was a mechanic before the war, fixing tractors and joking with customers. Now his hands rough from years of wrench work, grip a rifle, or when the pain overtakes him, Olena's sleeve. He joined the army to protect his family, but the war has kept him from them for months. His letters home are brief, scrawled in the dim light of a bunker, promising his daughter he'll return to teach her how to ride a bike. In his heart, fear wrestles with hope, a constant tug-of-war between the man who wants to live and the soldier who knows he might not. Then there's Ivan, a wiry 19-year-old from Odessa, the unit's radio man. His quick wit and knack for fixing jammed equipment make him indispensable, but his bravado hides a gnawing homesickness. Ivan dreams of the sea, of the salty breeze, and the boardwalk where he used to sketch ships at sunset. He enlisted because his older brother did, and now his brother is gone, lost in a skirmish near Kherson. Ivan doesn't talk about it, but Olena sees the weight in his eyes when he thinks no one's watching. He clings to his radio like a lifeline, its static a reminder of the world beyond the trenches. His greatest fear isn't death, but being forgotten, his sketches left unfinished in a drawer back home. The unit's commander, Captain Dmitro, is a grizzled veteran in his late 40s, his face etched with lines that tell of too many winters in too many wars. A Kiev native, Dmitro was a history teacher before the conflict, his lectures filled with tales of Ukraine's resilience. He leads with a calm that steadies the younger soldiers, but Olena notices the way his hands shake when he lights a cigarette, the only sign of the burden he carries. Dmytro's wife and son are safe in Poland, but he hasn't seen them in a year. He writes letters he never sends, afraid they'd reveal too much of the man beneath the officer. His inner world is a fortress, built to protect those he leads. But Olena senses the cracks, moments when he lingers over a wounded soldier, his eyes distant, as if seeing someone else. Olena's own inner world is a storm of contradictions. She is terrified every day of the shells, the snipers, the possibility of failure. Yet she moves through the fear driven by a stubborn belief that every life she saves is a small victory against the chaos. She thinks of her mother, often picturing her in their village kitchen, kneading dough with steady hands. Olena carries a small photo of them together, tucked into her medical kit, its edges worn from being touched. She dreams of returning home, of walking through the fields at dusk, but the war feels endless, and the thought of peace is a fragile thing easily shattered by the next explosion. Her faith in herself wavers. Can she keep going night after night, with blood on her hands and exhaustion in her bones? But then she remembers Petro's daughter, Ivan's sketches, Dmytro's unspoken grief, and she finds the strength to push on. The bond between Olena, Petro, Ivan, and Dmytro is unspoken but unbreakable. They are strangers thrown together by war, yet they've become a family of sorts, tethered by shared glances in the dark, by the warmth of a shared cigarette, by the quiet moments when they talk of home. Olena feels responsible for them, not just as a medic, but as a keeper of their hopes. She listens when Ivan rambles about Odessa's beaches, nods when Petro whispers about his daughter's laugh, and stays silent when Dmytro stares at the horizon. They trust her not just with their wounds, but with their fears, and that trust is both a burden and a gift. As the battle for Bakhmut looms closer, Olena's thoughts are a tangle of dread and resolve. She knows the coming days will test her in ways she can't yet imagine. She wonders if she's strong enough, if her hands will stop shaking, if she'll ever see her mother again. But she buries these thoughts, focusing instead on the weight of her medical kit, the rhythm of her breath, the faces of the men she's sworn to save. In the quiet before the storm, she whispers a prayer, not to a god, but to herself, a vow to keep going, no matter what. Movement, on the way to battle. The night before, the push, the air in Bakhmut, feels heavy, as if the city itself is holding its breath. Olena's unit gathers in the basement of the shattered school, their faces lit by the faint glow of a single kerosene lamp. The walls cracked and streaked with soot muffle the distant rumble of artillery, but the sound creeps in like an uninvited guest. Olena checks her medical kit for the 10th time, her fingers brushing over bandages, morphine vials, and a small flashlight she's taped to her wrist. Her heart thumps steadily, a rhythm she's learned to control despite the fear gnawing at her edges. Captain Dmytro stands at the head of the group, his voice low but firm as he outlines the mission: hold the eastern line near a cluster of ruined apartment blocks, reinforce the trenches, and prepare for a surge of wounded. The orders are simple, but the weight behind them is anything but. At 3 a.m., the unit moves out a silent procession through Bakhmut's skeletal streets. The snow has stopped leaving a thin crust that crunches under their boots. Olena walks near the back, her medical pack slung over one shoulder, its straps digging into her skin. Petro, his rifle slung across his chest, moves beside her, his breath visible in the freezing air. He's quieter than usual, his usual banter replaced by a tense silence. Ivan ahead of them cradles his radio, his eyes scanning the shadows for threats. Dmytro leads the way, his silhouette a steady anchor against the flickering skyline. The city is a maze of debris, overturned cars, shattered glass, and the occasional child's toy half buried in the snow. Each step feels like a gamble, the darkness hiding snipers' minds or worse. The journey to the Eastern Line is only 2 kilometers, but it feels endless. The unit moves in single file, hugging the walls of gutted buildings to avoid open ground. The air smells of burnt rubber and damp concrete, and the cold bites at Olena's exposed skin. Her headlamp is off light is a liability here, but the faint glow of a crescent moon catches the edges of broken windows, casting jagged reflections. Somewhere to the north, a flare arcs into the sky, bathing the ruins in a ghostly white glow before fading. The unit freezes, hearts pounding, waiting for the crack of a sniper's rifle that never comes. Dmytro raises a hand, signaling to move on, and they do their boots, sinking into the icy mud. Olena's mind drifts as they walk, a defense against the tension. She thinks of her village, of the way the sun filters through the pines of her mother's hands, kneading dough. The memory is vivid, almost painful, and she clings to it, a tether to a world beyond this one. But the war pulls her back. A low hum grows in the distance, drones their mechanical whine cutting through the night. Ivan curses under his breath, adjusting his radio to check for updates. The static crackles a voice, breaking through in fragments. Heavy movement. East. Prepare. Olena's stomach tightens. She glances at Petro, whose eyes are fixed on the ground, his jaw clenched. She wants to say something to ease his fear, but words feel inadequate against the weight of what's coming. They pass a collapsed church, its golden dome cracked and tilting into the snow. For a moment, the scene is almost beautiful, the moonlight catching the frost on its shattered mosaics. Olena pauses her breath, catching at the sight. It's a fleeting reminder of what Bakhmut once was, a place where people prayed, loved, lived. Now it's a graveyard of memories, and she's walking through it, carrying lives in her hands. Dmytro's voice, a harsh whisper, snaps her back. Keep moving, Olena. She nods, quickening her pace, her boots slipping slightly on the ice. The unit reaches the trenches just before dawn, a network of shallow ditches carved into the frozen earth. The Eastern Line is a patchwork of sandbags, concrete slabs, and scavenged metal, barely holding together under the constant shelling. Ukrainian soldiers, their faces gaunt with exhaustion, nod as Olena's unit arrives. The air here is thicker with smoke, the ground littered with spent casings and broken equipment. Olena sets up her aid post in a dugout, its roof a tarp stretched over wooden beams. The space is cramped, barely big enough for her to kneel, but it's sheltered from the wind, and she hopes from shrapnel. She arranges her supplies, gauze tourniquets, a precious few IV bags, her hands moving with practiced efficiency. The cold makes her fingers stiff, but she works through it, her breath fogging in the dim light of her flashlight. Petro and Oven take their positions nearby. Petro manning a machine gun nest, while Ivan monitors the radio. Dmytro moves along the trench, checking defenses and murmuring encouragement to the soldiers. The horizon is turning grey, the first hint of dawn, but the light brings no comfort. It only makes them more visible. Olena overhears snippets of conversation, soldiers talking about home, about a warm meal, about surviving just one more day. She tries not to listen, focusing instead on her task, but their voices seep into her, a reminder of why she's here. She catches Petro's eye as he adjusts his helmet, and he gives her a small nod, a silent thank you for being there. She returns it, her heart heavy with the weight of that trust. As the unit settles in, the tension builds like a gathering storm. The radio crackles with reports of movement beyond the hills. Vehicles, infantry, the low growl of tanks. Olena's hands pause over her kit, her pulse quickening. She knows what's coming, the wounded, the screams, the race against time. She's done this before too many times, but each moment feels new. Raw as if her nerves are exposed to the cold. She thinks of her training, of the calm voice of her professor in Lviv Focus, on the patient, not the chaos. But the chaos is everywhere, pressing in, and she wonders if she's ready for what's next. The first shell lands just after dawn, a deafening roar that shakes the earth. The trench erupts into motion soldiers, shouting weapons, clattering Dmitro, barking orders. Olena ducks instinctively, her hands shielding her head as dirt rains down. The air fills with the sharp tang of explosives, and the world narrows to this moment, this place. She glances at her kit, then at the trench entrance, where the first cries for help will come. Her hands tremble, but she clenches them, willing herself to stay steady. Petro's voice cuts through the noise, calling her name, and she knows it's time. The battle is here, and she's the one they'll look to when the world starts to break. The battle begins. Twist and struggle. The first shell lands like a thunderclap, shaking the trench and sending a cascade of frozen dirt onto Olena's shoulders. The air turns thick with smoke, the kind that stings the eyes and clogs the throat. Shouts erupt along the line, a chaotic symphony of orders and curses as the Ukrainian soldiers brace for the onslaught. Olena crouches in her dugout, her medical kit open beside her, her hands hovering over bandages and syringes. The ground trembles again, closer this time, and the tarp above her sags under the weight of debris. Her flashlight flickers, casting jagged shadows across the dirt walls. Outside, the dawn sky is a bruised grey, streaked with the orange glow of explosions. The battle for Bakhmut's eastern line has begun. The radio in Ivan's hands crackles, spitting fragments of urgent voices. Tanks, northeast, infantry following. Olena catches his eye, his face pale but focused, as he relays the message to Dmitro. The captain, crouched at the trench's edge, peers through binoculars, his jaw tight. "Hold the line!" he shouts, his voice cutting through the din. Petro, manning the machine gun nest, opens fire, the weapon's staccato roar, blending with the screech of incoming shells. The air hums with danger. Bullets zip overhead, and the ground pulses with each impact. Olena's heart pounds, but she forces herself to focus her hands, steadying as she prepares for the inevitable. The first wounded soldier stumbles into the dugout minutes later, his arm dangling, blood soaking his sleeve. Shrapnel. He gasps, his face grey with pain. Olena moves without thinking, her training a lifeline in the chaos. She cuts away his sleeve, revealing a jagged wound, and applies a tourniquet, her fingers slick but precise. "You're okay," she says, her voice calm, despite the tremor in her chest. The soldier nods, his eyes wide with shock, and she wonders if he believes her. She works fast, bandaging the wound and injecting morphine, her movements a dance of necessity. Another explosion rocks the trench, and she flinches, dirt pattering onto her back. "Go to the rear," she tells him, pointing to the evacuation path. He staggers out, and she turns back to her kit, ready for the next. The battle intensifies, a relentless tide of sound and motion. The trench becomes a blur of activity. Soldiers firing, reloading, shouting for ammo. Ivan's radio spit static, the signal jammed, cutting them off from the main command. Dmitro curses under his breath, his calm fraying, as he realizes they're on their own. Olena overhears him muttering to Petro, "We hold until they break, or we do." Petro nods, his face grim, his hands steady on the machine gun. Olena feels a pang of pride mixed with dread. They're her family now, bound by this moment, but she knows not all of them will make it through. A sudden twist changes everything. A drone's whine pierces the air, and before anyone can react, a blast tears through the trench 50 meters down the line. The explosion is deafening a wall of heat and sound that throws Olena against the dugout wall. Her ears ring, her vision blurs, but she forces herself to her feet, grabbing her kit. Medic. The cry comes from the smoke, desperate and raw. She runs her boots, slipping in the mud, her heart a hammer in her chest. The trench is a scene of chaos, soldiers scrambling, some frozen in shock, others dragging the wounded to cover. The drone strike has collapsed part of the line, leaving a gap where the enemy could pour through. Olena reaches the wounded first. A young soldier, barely older than Ivan, lies in the dirt, his leg mangled by shrapnel. His screams are high-pitched, almost inhuman, and Olena kneels beside him, her hands moving before her mind catches up. "Look at me," she says, her voice firm, locking eyes with him. His gaze is wild, but he clings to her words. She applies a tourniquet, her hands shaking as blood pools beneath her knees. The soldier's breathing slows his face, paling, and she knows she's racing time. Another medic, Andriy, appears beside her, his face streaked with soot. Together they stabilize the soldier, but the damage is severe. "We need to move him," Andriy says, his voice tight. Olena nods, but the evacuation path is under fire and the radio is still dead. The team's response is a testament to their bond. Petro, seeing the gap in the line, shifts his machine gun to cover it, his bursts of fire keeping the advancing infantry at bay. Ivan, despite the jammed radio, climbs onto a pile of rubble, risking exposure to signal a nearby unit with a flare. The red light arcs into the sky, a desperate plea for reinforcement. Dmytro rallies the remaining soldiers, directing them to shore up the collapsed trench with sandbags and debris. Olena and Andriy work in tandem, dragging the wounded to the dugout, their hands slick with sweat and blood. Every second feels like an eternity. Every decision, a knife's edge between life and death. Olena's mind is a storm of focus and fear. She thinks of Petro's daughter, of Ivan's, sketches of Dmytro's unsent letters, and the weight of their lives presses against her. Another soldier arrives, his chest heaving, a bullet wound in his shoulder. She patches him up, her hands moving faster now, her fear buried under necessity. The battle's rhythm is unrelenting. Shells fall, bullets sing, and the wounded keep coming. Olena's dugout becomes a sanctuary and a prison, its walls closing in as the air grows thick with the smell of blood and gunpowder. She catches Petro's eye through the smoke, his face set in determination, and she draws strength from it. They're in this together, a fragile thread of trust, holding them against the tide. A moment of quiet comes, unexpectedly, a lull in the shelling that feels almost unnatural. The soldiers pause their breaths, visible in the cold, their eyes scanning the horizon. Olena uses the moment to check her supplies. Her morphine is running low, her bandages nearly gone. She knows the lull won't last, and when the next wave comes, it will be worse. Dmytro crouches beside her, his face etched with exhaustion. "You're doing good, Olena," he says, his voice softer than usual. She nods, unable to speak, her throat tight with the weight of the lives she's holding together. The silence breaks with a distant rumble, tanks moving closer. The battle isn't over, and Olena knows the hardest moments are still ahead. The sacrifice, decision and turning point. The rumble of tanks grows louder, a low growl that vibrates through the frozen earth. The lull in the fighting has vanished, replaced by a mounting tension that presses against Olena's chest like a physical weight. The trench is a hive of controlled chaos. Soldiers reload weapons, stack sandbags, and shout updates over the roar of incoming shells. Olena's dugout is overflowing with wounded, their groans mingling with the crackle of Ivan's radio, which has finally sputtered back to life with garbled reports of enemy armor closing in. The air is thick with smoke, and the sharp tang of cordite and the grey dawn sky offers no relief, only a clearer view of the destruction. Bakhmut's eastern line is teetering, and Olena knows the next moments will decide who lives and who doesn't. She kneels beside a soldier with a shrapnel wound to his abdomen, her hands moving swiftly to pack the wound with gauze. His breathing is ragged, his eyes unfocused, but she keeps talking to him, her voice a steady anchor. "You're going to make it," she says, though the dwindling supplies in her kit tell a different story. Andriy, the other medic, is across the dugout stabilizing a soldier with a broken leg. Their eyes meet briefly, a silent acknowledgement of the impossible task before them. The wounded are piling up faster than they can treat, and the evacuation path remains under fire, a gauntlet of bullets and drones. Olena's hands tremble as she ties off a bandage, her mind racing. She's running out of time, out of supplies, out of everything but will. Outside, the situation deteriorates. Petro's machine gun nest is a focal point, his steady bursts, holding back waves of infantry, trying to exploit the gap from the earlier drone strike. Ivan perched on a mound of rubble relays coordinates to a distant artillery unit, his voice hoarse but unwavering. Dmitro moves along the trench, his calm voice rallying the soldiers, but Olena can see the strain in his posture, the way his shoulders hunch, as if carrying the weight of the entire line. The tanks are closer now, their engines a menacing drone, and the ground shakes with each shell they fire. A direct hit on the trench could collapse it, burying them all. Then it happens. A cry pierces the chaos. Petro's hit, Ivan's voice, high with panic, cuts through the noise. Olena's heart lurches. She scrambles out of the dugout, her medical kit slung over her shoulder, and runs toward the machine gun nest. The trench is a blur of smoke and motion, soldiers ducking as bullets snap overhead. She reaches Petro, who's slumped against the sandbags, his face pale blood seeping through his jacket. A bullet has torn through his shoulder, and his right arm hangs uselessly. His eyes wide with pain find hers. "Olena," he gasps. "Don't let me go." She drops to her knees, her hands already moving, cutting away his jacket to expose the wound. The bullet has missed major arteries, but the bleeding is heavy, and she knows he'll go into shock if she doesn't act fast. "Stay with me, Petro," she says, her voice firm. Despite the fear clawing at her, she applies a pressure bandage, her fingers slick with blood, and injects morphine to dull his pain. His hand grips hers, weak but desperate, and she feels the weight of his trust, his life in that touch. She thinks of his daughter, the pictures in his pocket, and her resolve hardens. She won't let him die. But the battle doesn't wait. Another shell lands nearby, showering them with dirt. Ivan shouts from the radio, "Tanks are 200 meters out. We need to fall back," Dimitro's voice cuts through sharp and commanding. "Hold the line, we can't let them through." Olena glances up, seeing the conflict in Dimitro's eyes. He knows the line is crumbling, but retreating means abandoning the wounded, including Petro. The tanks are too close, their shells tearing into the trench, and the infantry is pressing harder, their silhouettes visible through the smoke. The unit is outnumbered, outgunned, and cut off from reinforcement. Olena realizes the truth. If they don't act now, the line will break, and everyone in the trench could be lost. A decision looms heavy and inevitable. Olena looks at Petro, his breathing shallow but steady, and then at the dugout, where more wounded wait. She knows she can stabilize Petro here, but the trench is no longer safe. The evacuation path, though dangerous, is their only chance to get the wounded to the rear, where a field hospital might save them. But moving Petro now risks his life. The jolting journey could worsen his bleeding, and the path is a shooting gallery for snipers and drones. Staying means treating him under fire with dwindling supplies and the risk of the trench collapsing. Olena's mind races her training, warring with her instinct to protect Petro at all costs. Dmytro crouches beside her, his face grim. "Olena, we need you at the dugout. More wounded are coming." His words are a plea and an order, and she feels the weight of his trust too. She looks at Petro, then at the trench, where soldiers are fighting to hold the line. She knows what she has to do, but it feels like tearing herself in two. "I'm taking him," she says, her voice steady despite the chaos. "I'll get him to the rear." Dmytro hesitates, then nods, his eyes saying what his words don't. He's counting on her, but he knows the risk. The decision is made, but it's a sacrifice. Olena and Andriy lift Petro, supporting his weight as they move toward the evacuation path. Ivan volunteers to guide them, his radio slung over his shoulder, his eyes scanning the sky for drones. The path is a narrow stretch of open ground, littered with debris and exposed to enemy fire. Every step is a gamble, every second a prayer. Olena's arms burn under Petro's weight, but she keeps moving, her breath ragged, her focus narrowing to the rhythm of their steps. Bullets kick up dirt around them, and a drone's whine grows louder, but she doesn't look back. Petro's head lolls against her shoulder, his voice a faint whisper. "Tell my daughter." "I tried." They reach a shallow ditch, temporary cover, and Olena checks Petro's bandage. The bleeding has slowed, but he's fading his pulse, weak. Andriy signals to a battered jeep waiting at the edge of the path, its driver waving frantically. They're almost there, but the final stretch is the most exposed. Olena looks at Ivan, who's crouched beside her, his face streaked with mud. "Go," he says, his voice firm. "I'll cover you." Before she can protest, he's up firing his rifle to draw attention, a reckless act of courage to give them a chance. Olena's throat tightens, but she moves, dragging Petro toward the jeep, Andriy at her side. The turning point comes as they reach the vehicle. A shell lands close the blast, knocking Olena to her knees, but she holds on to Petro, shielding him with her body. The driver pulls them into the jeep, and they speed away, tires spinning in the mud. Olena looks back, seeing Ivan's silhouette disappear into the smoke, still firing. Her heart aches with the knowledge that he's risking everything for them. Petro's hand grips hers, weaker now, but still there. She whispers to him, "You're going to make it," and prays it's true. The jeep races toward the field hospital, the battle fading behind them, but Olena knows the cost of this moment will linger. Aftermath, the cost and silence. The jeep lurches over the rutted path, its engine straining as it speeds away from the front line. Olena clings to Petro, her hands pressed against his bandage, her eyes fixed on his pale face. The world outside is a blur of smoke and snow, the distant thuds of artillery fading into a dull roar. The driver, a young soldier with a grim expression, weaves through debris, dodging craters and fallen trees. Andriy in the front seat scans the horizon for drones, his rifle ready. Olena's heart pounds, each beat a reminder of Petro's fading pulse beneath her fingers. The field hospital is 3 kilometers away, an eternity in this war zone, but it's their only hope. She whispers to Petro, her voice barely audible over the engine. "Hold on just a little longer." His eyes flutter, but he doesn't respond. The journey feels like a descent into a dream. The landscape of Bakhmut's outskirts, a monochrome wasteland. Shattered buildings loom like ghosts, their broken windows staring blankly. The snow, now falling lightly, dusts the wreckage in a thin veil softening the edges of destruction. A child's bicycle lies half buried in a ditch, its red frame a stark splash of color against the grey. Olena's mind snags on it, a fleeting reminder of the life this city once held. She pushes the thought away, focusing on Petro's shallow breathing, on the warmth of his hand in hers. The jeep hits a bump, jarring them, and she tightens her grip, willing him to stay with her. They reach the field hospital, just as Petro's pulse weakens further. The facility, a converted warehouse on the city's edge, is a hive of activity. Medics rush between stretchers, their voices sharp with urgency. Olena and Andriy carry Petro inside his weight, heavy in their arms. A doctor takes over barking orders as nurses swarm. Olena steps back, her hands bloodied, her chest tight with a mix of relief and dread. She's done all she can, but Petro's fate is out of her hands now. The hospital smells of antiseptic and despair, its concrete floor stained with the stories of too many soldiers. Olena lingers, watching, as Petro is wheeled away, his face lost in the chaos. The battle for the Eastern Line continues, its echoes reaching the hospital in the form of more wounded. Olena wants to return to find Ivan and Dmytro, to know if the trench held, but her body betrays her. Exhaustion crashes over her like a wave, her legs trembling as she sinks onto a crate outside the warehouse. The air is cold sharp with the promise of more snow, and the sky is a heavy grey, swallowing the last traces of dawn. She pulls the photo of her mother from her kit, its edges worn, and traces it with her thumb. The silence is deafening, broken only by the distant rumble of the fight and the occasional cry from inside the hospital. Back at the trench, the line held, but at a cost. Dmytro's unit repelled the infantry push, but the tanks left, scars cratered, earth collapsed defenses, and too many names added to the list of the lost. Ivan, who risked himself to cover Olena's escape, made it back to the trench, his arm grazed by a bullet, but his spirit unbroken. He sits now, clutching his radio, his sketches forgotten in the heat of survival. Dmytro, his face etched deeper with exhaustion, counts the survivors, his voice steady, but his eyes distant. The gap in the line was sealed, but the victory feels hollow, measured in blood and silence. Olena learns this later when a runner from the trench brings news. The unit held, but 3 soldiers didn't make it. Their names hang in the air unspoken, but heavy, and Olena feels their weight settle into her bones. She thinks of Ivan's reckless courage, of Dmytro's unwavering resolve, and wonders how many more they can lose before the war takes them all. The hospital is a microcosm of the aftermath. Stretchers line the walls. Medics move like shadows, and the wounded stare at the ceiling, their eyes holding stories they may never tell. Olena's hands, still stained with Petro's blood, feel foreign, as if they belong to someone else. The city itself mirrors the silence of the aftermath. The snow falls heavier now, blanketing the ruins in a deceptive calm. Shell casings litter the ground, glinting dully under the flakes. A lone dog, ribs visible, picks through the debris, its bark swallowed by the wind. The school where Olena worked, now half collapsed from the morning's shelling, stands as a testament to the battle's toll. Its chalkboards, once bright with children's drawings, are buried under rubble, a quiet grave for innocence. The air smells of ash and frost, a reminder that life here is measured in moments stolen from chaos. Olena sits outside the hospital, her breath fogging in the cold, and lets the silence settle. She thinks of Petro now in surgery, his life hanging on the skill of overworked doctors. She thinks of his daughter waiting for a father who might not return. The thought is a knife, sharp, but not cruel a reminder of why she keeps going. She pulls her coat tighter, the Ukrainian patch on her sleeve catching the faint light. The war has stripped away so much, homes, dreams, futures, but it hasn't taken her resolve. Not yet. Andriy joins her, his face as weary as hers. They don't speak, but the shared silence is enough. He offers her a cigarette, and she takes it, though she doesn't smoke. The act feels like a ritual, a moment of connection in a world that feels fractured. They watch the snow fall each flake, a fleeting promise of peace that melts on contact. Olena's mind drifts to the trench, to the soldiers still fighting to the lives she couldn't save. The guilt is there, a quiet ache, but she pushes it down. There's no room for it now, not when more will need her. The aftermath is not just the quiet after the storm, but the realization of what's been lost and what's been gained. The line held, and that means something, even if the cost is etched in the faces of those who survived. Olena knows Petro's survival, if he makes it, is a small victory, a thread of hope in a tapestry of loss. She thinks of Ivan's flare, Dimitro's orders, her own trembling hands, and sees them as pieces of a larger whole, a unit, a family bound by the unspoken vow to keep going. The silence around her is not empty, but heavy with meaning. A pause before the war resumes its relentless march. Message to viewer. The snow continues to fall over Bakhmut, a soft curtain that drapes the ruins in a fleeting stillness. Olena sits outside the field hospital, her hands wrapped around the cigarette Andriy gave her, its tip glowing faintly in the dim light. The cold seeps through her coat, but she doesn't move her eyes, fixed on the horizon, where the sky meets the broken city. The distant rumble of artillery has faded, replaced by the low hum of the hospital, behind her medics, calling out stretchers, creaking the quiet moans of the wounded. Petro is still in surgery, his fate uncertain, and the weight of that uncertainty sits heavy in Olena's chest. She thinks of his daughter, of the pictures he carried, and wonders if she'll ever see him smile again. The aftermath of the battle lingers like a bruise. The Eastern Line held a fragile victory, bought with blood and grit. Olena hasn't seen Ivan or Dmitro since she left the trench, but the runner's news that they survived, that the unit stood firm, offers a flicker of relief. Yet the names of the 3 soldiers who didn't make it echo in her mind, their absence, a shadow that follows her. She doesn't know their faces, only their voices, their cries for help in the chaos. The war doesn't pause for grief, but Olena feels it, a quiet ache that settles beside her exhaustion. She wonders how many more names she'll carry before this is over. Her thoughts drift to her village, to the life she left behind. She sees her mother's kitchen, the wooden table scarred from years of use, the smell of bread fresh from the oven. She imagines her mother now perhaps awake, in the early hours worrying in silence. Olena pulls the worn photo from her kit, her thumb tracing her mother's face. The image is a lifeline, a reminder of why she's here, not for glory or vengeance, but for the people she loves, for the land that shaped her. The war has taken so much, but it hasn't taken that. Not yet. She thinks of Ivan, his reckless courage, risking himself to cover her escape with Petro. She sees him in her mind, crouched on the rubble, his radio clutched like a talisman, his eyes bright with defiance. She thinks of Dmitro, his steady voice, holding the unit together. His unsent letters, a silent testament to the man beneath the commander. And she thinks of Petro, his hand gripping hers, his whispered plea to tell his daughter he tried. These men, her family in this broken place, are the reason she keeps going. Their trust in her, their hope, is both a burden and a gift, a reason to face another day in the trenches. Olena stubs out the cigarette, its ash crumbling into the snow. She stands her legs, stiff from the cold, and looks out over Bakhmut. The city is a ghost, its streets silent under the weight of destruction. A lone street lamp, somehow still standing, flickers weakly, casting a pale circle of light. It feels like a metaphor, fragile but persistent, a small defiance against the dark. Olena's breath catches, and for a moment she allows herself to imagine a world beyond this war, a world where Bakhmut's children return to their schools, where Petro teaches his daughter to ride a bike, where Ivan sketches the sea at sunset. The vision is distant, almost impossible, but it's enough to keep her moving. The war she knows is bigger than her, bigger than this city, bigger than the lives she's fighting to save. It's a force that reshapes everything it touches, leaving scars on bodies and souls. Yet in its shadow, Olena sees the resilience of those around her, the soldiers who share their last cigarette, the medics who work until their hands bleed, the civilians who offer water or shelter despite having nothing left. These acts, small and unspoken, are the heart of this war, the human thread that binds them all. Olena's role as a medic is not just to stitch wounds, but to carry that thread, to hold on to hope when everything else crumbles. She thinks of a letter she wrote to her mother, tucked away in her kit, unsent like Dimitro's. In it, she poured out her fears, her doubts, her love. "I don't know if I'm strong enough," she wrote, "but I know I have to try." She hasn't sent it, afraid it would worry her mother more than comfort her. But now, sitting in the snow, she resolves to send it when she can. Not because she's given up, but because she wants her mother to know she's still here, still fighting, still hers. The thought steadies her, a quiet promise to keep going. The hospital door creaks open, and Andriy steps out, his face weary but calm. "Petro's out of surgery," he says, his voice low. "He's stable for now." Olena exhales, a knot in her chest loosening. It's not a guarantee, but it's enough a small victory in a war that offers so few. She nods, unable to speak, and Andriy sits beside her, their shoulders brushing. They don't need words. The shared silence says enough. The snow falls around them, blanketing the world in a hush that feels almost sacred. Olena's mind turns to the viewer, to those who might hear this story. She wonders what they see when they think of war. Headlines, maps, numbers. She wants them to see the people, Petro's trembling hand, Ivan's flare in the sky, Dimitro's steady voice, her own shaking fingers tying a bandage. War is not just battles or strategies. It's the weight of a life in your hands, the choice to keep going when hope feels like a lie. It's the courage to face the dark, not because you are fearless, but because someone else needs you to be. She wants them to ask themselves, what would you do in that moment? What keeps you fighting when the world falls apart? The story of Bakhmut, of Olena, and her unit is one of countless stories in this war, each a testament to the human spirit. It's a story of sacrifice, not for glory, but for the person beside you. It's a story of hope, fragile but unyielding like a street lamp flickering in the ruins. Olena doesn't know if peace will come or when, but she knows she'll keep fighting for it, one life at a time. She hopes the viewer will carry this story with them, not as a tale of war, but as a reminder of what it means to be human. As the snow falls, Olena stands, brushing it from her coat. The hospital hums behind her, a beacon of life in a city of ghosts. She takes a breath, the cold air sharp in her lungs, and heads back inside. There are more wounded to tend, more lives to hold on to. The war isn't over, but neither is she. And somewhere in the quiet spaces between the chaos, there's a flicker of hope that tomorrow might be different. To those watching, what does courage mean to you? Share your thoughts below, and let's honor the untold stories of those who face the impossible every day. Subscribe to Ukraine, Frontline War Stories for more human tales from the heart of the conflict. Together, let's keep their voices alive.